As the Allies advanced throughout German-occupied territory during the Second World War, they came across a number of concentration camps. These sites told the true horror of Hitler's Third Reich and the true murderous intent of his regime. One lesser-known camp, which was liberated, was Mittelbau-Dora, which was a large camp and was a sub-camp of the Buchenwald complex. It's estimated that around 20,000 prisoners died within the barbed wire fences there, but after the war, at the Dora trials, shockingly only one person was executed for their horrific crimes there. So join us today as we look at the story of the sole execution of the guard of Mittelbau-Dora. And remember to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. In the summer of 1943, the Germans began to mass produce the V-2 ballistic rocket, but on the 18th of August a bombing raid conducted by the RAF on the factory creating it seriously damaged the works and facility. This stopped construction in a factory on a Baltic island, and because of this, Hitler ordered that Himmler should instead use prisoners from the concentration camps to make the V-2. Different sites were set up for this, and Albert Speer, along with Himmler, agreed to create the Mittelwerk underground facility to make the V-2. This would protect it from the bombing raids, and initially once Mittelwerk was created, it was given a contract for 12,000 rockets. This was a colossal deal, and meant that the facility would be making 750 million Reichsmarks worth of ballistic missiles. The facility was based in the Kirchstein, a hill in Thuringia, and within days the first transport of inmates from Buchenwald arrived, with SS guards at the Kirchstein. They were the first inmates in the newly created subcamp of Arbeitslager Dora, and over the following months more prisoners were taken each day to work in the production of the V-2. The numbers of prisoners forced to work there swelled to around 10,500, and initially there were no barrack huts, and the prisoners were forced to sleep inside the tunnels where they were making the missiles on bunk beds. The conditions were incredibly primitive. They were given barrels to use as toilets. Many of the workers died from hunger, cold, and being overworked to death, and the work was incredibly hard and heavy. As time went on, they were transported to live in an above-ground camp based on the south side of the mountain, but still many were forced to sleep in the tunnels. Thousands of people died at Dora, and those who were dying were sent away to other camps, such as Bergen-Belsen, and it was said that the work detachments at Dora had the highest death rate in the entire concentration camp system. Albert Speer, Hitler's architect, when he visited the tunnels to inspect the work which was going on, was shocked by the conditions, and some of his staff were so appalled that they had to take time off work. Speer, though, congratulated the SS on their work, creating the underground facility. The prisoners who worked here came from all over Europe, and they included Jews, but they were treated terribly, and often they were whipped and beaten, to the point where bones were broken, and where prisoners even passed away. Torture was used there, as was execution as a method of deterring people. It's believed that 350 people were hanged inside of Dora for a number of things, with 200 being killed for sabotaging the work which was going on. As prisoners from Auschwitz came to the camp later, it was said that mass executions were a daily thing, with the SS on some days hanging 30 people in the morning, and then on one occasion 50 people were hanged on one day. 60,000 prisoners passed through the gates of Mittelbau-Dora, but it's believed that around 20,000 died there. Many were sent to other camps such as Belsen if they were sick or dying, and there were a large amount of unregistered people based there. In terms of production of the V-2 rocket, the monthly output by May 1944 was around 400 rockets, which was seen as below the projected output of the camp. It did increase to 600 rockets, but it was clear that the production numbers were not what the Germans needed. Conditions declined in Dora rather quickly, as by November 1944, when the camp became fully operational, things were already going downhill. Its own subcamps began to become overcrowded, and with the winter setting in, the health of the prisoners declined significantly. The death rate rose exponentially, and this was not helped when more prisoners were transferred from Auschwitz. Up to 16,000 prisoners arrived from the huge camp, and those who came often were sick, and many died on the transports there. However, in early April 1945, the nearby city of Nordhausen was hit heavily by Allied bombers, levelling 75% of the town. Thousands died, and amongst the dead were up to 1,500 prisoners of Mittelbau-Dora. But in that same month, the Americans were advancing towards the area, and the Germans forced the prisoners into boxcars. They brutally manhandled them and shot those who were straggling, and a number of trains packed with thousands of prisoners left for other camps. A number were also forced on a death march, and those who could not keep up were shot. Over 1,000 prisoners were massacred by the guards, SS men and Wehrmacht officers when they were forced into a barn that was then set on fire. But as the camp had been evacuated, there were very few left at Dora by the time it was liberated by the Americans. The transports of prisoners arrived at Belsen, and many succumbed to the conditions at that camp. But after liberation of Dora, a war crimes trial was held to punish those guards and members of the staff who were involved in the running of the forced labour facility and the camp. 19 men were brought to trial and were accused of crimes that took place at Mittelbau-Dora and also the sub-camps. All of the defendants were charged with being involved in the abuse and killing of prisoners of war, and the prosecution team was made up of Americans. The whole trial was dominated by the American military and was run by them and those who liberated the camp. The defendants consisted of 14 members of the SS, 4 capos and 1 civilian. The highest ranking defendant was the former physician Heinrich Schmidt. The trial began on the 7th of August 1947 within the walls of Dachau. Much of the evidence presented was based around the forced labour conditions at Dora and how the staff treated the prisoners. Witnesses outlined the horror and brutal treatment and the executions that the guards conducted on a daily basis. The verdict was delivered on Christmas Eve 1947, and 7 life sentences were given, 7 fixed-term sentences were given out, but there was only 1 death penalty given. The only man to be sentenced to death at the Dora trial and the subsequent secondary trials was the protective custody camp leader, Hans Merza, at the Dora complex, and he was a senior member of staff. Whilst here he committed many different atrocities, and he was involved in the execution of prisoners. During the hangings of prisoners, Merza was known for cutting down the condemned near death and then rehanging them to prolong their suffering. He was later captured and was involved in the death marches, and at trial he said, "The same way, with the same pleasure as you shoot deer, I shot a human being. When I came to the SS and had to shoot the first 3 persons, my food did not taste good for 3 days. But today it is a pleasure and a joy for me," referring to how he felt leading the death marches and shooting prisoners. At Landsberg prison, Hans Merza was executed on the 26th of November 1948. He was the only man to be condemned during the Dora trials, and he was kept at Landsberg prison in his cell to await his execution. In the morning he was brought out of his cell into the prison courtyard where a gallows had been made. This gallows took the lives of hundreds during the years following the Second World War. He was handed over to the executioner once his identity was confirmed, and then Merza was walked up the stairs to meet his maker. He was accompanied by US guards and also a priest, who asked him for his final words. Then the executioner placed a black hood over his head, and then the noose, before the guards stepped back and the lever was pulled, with him plunging to his death. The execution of Hans Merza was the only one to take place following the Dora trials, in which the Allies sought to punish those who were suspected of war crimes at Mittelbau-Dora. For those 20,000 people who died inside of the walls, there was seemingly insignificant amounts of justice dished out in the post-war trials. Mittelbau-Dora, as mentioned, was one of the worst and most dangerous camps, and was known as a place where the death rate at times was incredibly high. Once again, thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.